Morning, everyone.
Good morning. I see the recording had been paused, so now that we're recording again, good morning and welcome to the Maryland Online Spring 2021 webinar with Russ, Poulin, one of the premier higher education experts regarding the new administration and possible policy changes at the federal and the state level. My name is Tony Hawkins, and I'm the Provost and Executive Vice President of Academic Affairs, Continuing Education and Workforce Development at Frederick Community College, and I am serving as today's moderator. I also have the pleasure of being a member of the Maryland Online Board, an interim member. And on behalf of the board and MOL member institutions, let me welcome you to this morning's webinar. I am saying hello to you from Washington, D.C., the home of various tribes of Algonquin-speaking Piscataway people who were the original inhabitants of the lands around the Potomac River when Europeans first visited the area in the early 17th century. And in the District of Columbia, we are experiencing a winter weather surprise with temperatures expected to reach the 60s today following a week of ice, snow, and cold temperatures. So I'm going to ask you as a little way to get you engaged, if you would you please place your name and what city or town you're currently in and today's weather so that we can chat to see where folks are, if we're all experiencing the same break in summer in the winter weather, and just get us kind of used to engaging in this conversation using the chat feature. So feel free to populate now and let us know who you are and if you're bundled up or shedding clothes because now we have a little bit of nice weather. I see we've got folks saying hello. Okay, I'll let you keep letting us know who you are and where you're from and what the weather is like. But in a moment, I will introduce our featured speaker. But first, I wanted to explain my role as today's moderator for the webinar. My job really is to keep the discussion going and to get as many of our questions and comments, many of your questions and comments answered and addressed as possible. The main function of the moderator is to really stay out of the way. So I will do my best to facilitate ongoing conversation. We're going to ask that you please use the chat feature of the Zoom webinar, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. I'll look for raised hands if there are questions and you'd like to raise your hand. Wendy Gilbert and Julie Porosky-Hamlin, both the Executive Director and Director of Maryland Online, they'll be on hand and occasionally may assist me monitoring the chat as our guest proceeds through his presentation. So like I said, my role is to get in as many questions to Russ Poulin as possible. One more reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on Maryland Online's YouTube channel for later viewing or sharing with colleagues who are unable to be with us here today. So yes, I see you still are posting where you are and what the weather is. Wonderful. Today's webinar is entitled Some Things That Are Coming in 2021 and What to Expect from the New Administration. And to share thoughts and predictions about the new administration and possible policy changes is our presenter, Russ Poulin. Russ Poulin leads WCET, the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, or WICHE, the Technology Enhanced Education area, which focuses on the practice, policy, and advocacy of technology enhanced learning and higher education. WCET's members hail from all 50 states and a few from Canada. As a WICHE vice president, he advises on policy and projects for the Regional Higher Education Compact. Russ represents the Distance Education Committee or community on federal negotiated rulemaking committees and subcommittees. He has received recognition from the President's Forum, Excelsior College, and the National University Technology Network for his contributions to policies for technology-enhanced post-secondary education. Russ received a bachelor's from the University of Colorado, Denver, and a master's from the University of Northern Colorado. He's also partial to movies, cats, and his wife, Laurie. We have invited Russ here to draw upon his experience on how policies and regulations impact the operation of technology-enhanced teaching and learning, and to tell us some things that are coming in 2021 with the new Biden-Harris administration. So with that clarity and of purpose and function, please join me and welcome Russ Poulin.
Hi, and thank you, Tony, and thank you everyone for welcoming me. Great to always be with Julie and Wendy and the whole Maryland Online crew that we have out here. And as happens, I am partial to cats. This is my friend Luna, who will be joining us today, and we'll be watching all of you today. And she may actually, she's not here at the moment, but she may come through and give a guest appearance at some time, or offer her opinion at some point, which is always good. With that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Thanks. You can see my picture there that is mentioned that I was on some negotiated rulemaking committees. Those are things that help to make these rules, that there are people who actually sit in a small room and come up with these things. How about that? And that you can see that particularly what's happened in the last 6 months, that reading the Constitution is sometimes a good thing. And there's my email if you need to get hold of me. WCET, WICHE Cooperative for Educational Technologies, that while we're housed within a regional higher education compact, Maryland is a member of the Southern Regional Education Board. I'm out in Boulder, Colorado, ancestral land of the Arapaho, Kiowa, Cheyenne. I'm out in Boulder, Colorado. Out here, but even so, we're a national organization with members in all 50 states, and most of our members are institutions. In Maryland's got a good number of members that we have, and in fact, I think it's something like over 2/3 of our members actually come from outside the WICHE states. If you're not on that list and would like to be interested in becoming a member, we certainly would like to talk to you about that. With that, for today, that I love the things in the title that we're going to talk about. So what we talked about in setting this up, we're going to go a little bit deeper in a couple of things, couple of regulations that are coming out. Talk a little bit about what you can do about those, and then finally what might be coming in the coming year, that with the new administration coming in, the Biden-Harris administration. With that, I want to go ahead and start and talk about these are some rules that came out of the last negotiated rulemaking, which was now 2 years ago. It's hard to believe. Some of the rules came out last year and went into place in July 1st of 2020. And this first one I'm going to talk about actually is in place now. And some other rules came out late last year and actually go into place July of 2021. And so I'll make sure to differentiate between the two. And so this student identity verification, is one that is an issue that is applied only to distance education. We tried to apply it more broadly, but we weren't able to have that happen. But it's only for distance education. And the idea is about that I think that there's worry about really, cheating. Is there cheating on quizzes or tests or homework assignments? And then we know that never happens in face-to-face courses, right? But anyway, that there are rules about this, and you can see more about that. And well, before I go into that you may recall that in the old rule that there was a couple of examples for student identity verification. And one was that you had a login, or another was that you use proctoring, where it says other sort of technological things. Those were taken out because they really were intended to be examples. And what was happening is that institutions were saying, hey, we have a login and that solves everything. And that was not the original intent. And so they took those out. And like everything that they've done in the rules that came out last year and this year, there's a lot more reliance in terms of the relationship between accrediting agencies and the institutions to try to figure out what works and for you to have some evidence of what works. And that's applied again in this situation, and will be applied in the other rule that we'll talk about today. So that the other thing about these rules we'll talk about today is that there's no clear, you do this, like there's 40 mile per hour, don't go over 40 mile per hour in your car. There's no clear line. These are things where you have to, come up with ways that you feel that you're in compliance and then have evidence for that. And that frustrates people because they want really clear rules, and it's really hard to write really clear, hard and fast rules that fit for 6,000 institutions that get federal financial aid in a variety of formats. So that is something. So you be careful what you ask for. You might just get it if somebody writes a very, very clear rule that doesn't fit everyone. With that, I will go to the next part, and I will, in all of these, I'll not do really great instructional design things, because what we want to do is really get to what does the wording actually say in all of this. And so, this is in the rules for accreditors, and these are things that accreditors, your accrediting agency, Middle States, right, in Maryland, will be looking at when they do a review, and sometimes might be federal financial aid might look at it as well if they do a review of your institution. And here that they want to show that the student who registers for the course is the same one who is academically engaging, and there's a whole definition for that term now, which is good because that was not fully defined before. So it's the one who's taking the quiz, the one who's participating in online discussion, is the one who's turning in assignments, is turning in papers, all of those sorts of things which you're judging academically whether the student is learning and progressing or not. So you want it. The one who registers is the same one who's doing all those academic things, and if it's somebody else that's doing for them, that's not really what we want. So that's the expectation. Again, that you have a process, and so that's really broad. What does that mean? And some people, and there's actually some vendors who have taken the change of taking out the login and the other changes and this wording to say, oh, it means you must buy proctoring software. This does not mean you have to buy proctoring software. You have to. It just says you have to have a process. So you have to have thought about it and come up with something. And we're seeing a lot of institutions going to, doing a lot more development in terms of assessment practices and what is active assessment, and how can you do a better job of actually assessing learning than maybe we've done before. With that, go to the next part. So you have that process that you're doing something, and it doesn't have to be the same for every program across the institution, because it might make sense that what works for nursing might be different than what works for business, than what might be work for another program. So they can be different across the institution. You just have to have processes for the institution. You have to know what they are, and you get people with that. And this is one that has tripped people up, and has been a problem for some, is that if there are additional charges, and so let's say that you do require people to go to a proctoring site. Let's say that you require people to get a camera or to have proctoring software. Excuse me. That if you do any of those things, and that there's additional charges to do that, that you're supposed to notify the student about that at the time of registration. And a lot of people say, "Oh, well, we tell them in the syllabus when they get in." Well, that's too late. That it's supposed to be when they register, so that they can decide, maybe one course has maybe two classes of the exact same course. One has no cost and the other one does, and they're both distance ed. The student should be able to make that choice as to what they want to do. And so that is one that sometimes trips people up. With that, so I haven't seen much more guidance from the accrediting agencies about what they're actually looking for, and maybe some of you have seen that I haven't seen, because I haven't watched Middle States maybe as closely as I should have. But you should have some. What is the idea? What is it that you're doing? How is it that you're doing that? And then are there tools that can help? But again, it's not required that you buy tools. I've seen some really heavy-handed advertisement campaigns around that, and be careful about that. And then faculty development and instructional designer development in terms of what are ways that we can work with academic assessments. With that, and I'll pause there. Tony, is there any questions we should go to before I move to the next one?
Yes, there is. There's actually a question about verification and charges and notification to students. This is a question that asks if the syllabus is made available prior to registration, is that sufficient for notification and verification?
If it's easily findable as part of the registration process, or the students are directed there, if the syllabus is hidden somewhere deep on the website and the student has to have cracker crumbs in order to get there, so you see, so yes, that's actually very good. That's very helpful to have it available, but it must not only be available, it has to be discoverable as part of the registration process.
Great.
Okay.
I'll pause to see if there are any other questions about student identity verification. And it looks like there are no other questions, Russ, if you want to continue. Okay.
Well, we'll go on to my favorite subject lately is regular and substantive interaction. This is part of the updated definition of distance education. And distance education is defined in a way to separate it from correspondence education. And so remember, correspondence education used to be all done through the mail, and now it's really done through electronics as well. But they really got into this notion of interaction being a differentiator between those. And why did they want to do that? Well, because you can get full federal financial aid for distance education courses, but it's possible to get some, but you might get less if it's declared correspondence courses, or if the institution itself has more than 50% of its courses being declared correspondence courses, or 50% of its students being declared correspondence students. Then what happens is that you could lose all of your federal financial aid for the institution, and we don't want that. That ends up being a problem. So this is something that trying to figure this out has been an issue for a long time. The new rule goes in place, as I say, down there July 1st, 2021. And one of the problems is that this was a short phrase that was in the distance education definition way back in 1992, and has not been fully clarified, or there hasn't been full guidance about exactly what this means over the years. And that's been kind of a problem, because if you don't get full guidance, how do you know what it is? Excuse me, I've got a little tickle in my throat, so I apologize for that. How do you know what it is? And so that is something where we really tried to work to, how can we give more guidance to institutions about how it works? Now, one of the problems that we're going to get into is about the term interaction. And I'll say this more than once, that by interaction, remember that this is for federal financial aid purposes. So we think of interaction, we think about a whole lot of academic things that happen. Put that aside for the moment, because it's really a different definition. It's much more around what the faculty person does, what the instructor does. And to me, it's much more about dissemination, because most of the time we're counting things that the faculty person does, and not what we see as true interaction. And so it's really hard for us who work in trying to figure out, how do we create creative interaction? Well, you'll notice that a lot of these things aren't really about interaction, which is too bad, and I apologize for that, but that's what's in the legislation, and we couldn't change that part of it. So with that, a brief history, I said that there wasn't, there was not clear guidance, and so Van Davis, who contracts with us, and I this is going back 4 or 5 years ago, that we went through and tried to look at all the guidance that was out there, and then looked at all the rulings at the time. This was prior to the WGU ruling, all the rulings for or against institutions that were out there that were around this regular and substantive interaction issue. And we tried to think, well, what are they looking for in these things? And we did write this blog post that you see down there at the bottom on the WCET Frontiers blog about and trying to interpret what's going on in regular and substantive interaction. And actually, for 4 years running, this was the top blog post that we had out there, because there was, it's really kind of sad that there was not other places that you could go to get good answers on this. And so before we go into what's coming, it's good to get a good idea about what was in place and is currently in place until July of this year. And 4 main areas: interaction. Remember, I said they were only counting any activities that were initiated by the instructor. So no, they weren't worried about student-to-student interaction. They weren't worried about student-to-instructor interaction. They weren't worried about interaction with adaptive learning tools or any of those sorts of things. It was only, what did the instructor do? Were they giving a lecture? Did they send out a test? What did they do? For the instructor, it was that the instructor met the standards of your accrediting agency, and you see the little asterisks there, that was true up until the WGU one, where and you may recall a few years ago, WGU got hit on this issue and was asked to pay back essentially about $1 billion. That's not, it was 700 million, but when you added up everything else, it got to be $1 billion. That's a lot. They didn't have that hanging around. And so the meets accreditation standards. Well, the odd thing is that everything before that, that they said as long as you met the accreditation standards, you were fine. And WGU actually met the standards of Northwest and had a letter to that effect. And so that got weird. So then substantive was of an academic nature. That meant that if it's a English class that you're talking about Shakespeare, a math class that you're talking about differential equations, whatever it is that and then things about basketball or other sorts of things didn't count, or the weather that we had down here. Regular was this. I love this. Regular was regular. Okay, what does that mean? That they wanted to see some sort of regularity or in a syllabus or something like that. All right, let's move forward. That gives you some background. Let's see what we have coming with us. And so the first one is with the instructor, and that this was something else that WGU was, or something that WGU was hit on, was that they use an instructional team model where they have the instructor of record, but they also have some people that help to guide that are advisors across courses, and that they were counting those in, and that was an acceptable model to Northwest. Others, and they said that, and in the audit that they said that wasn't acceptable, and so which called into question, well, what if I use a TA or a GA, or what if I use 2 instructors? That they seem to narrow it down to just the instructor of record. Well, that that doesn't work for so many, and we tried to come up with ways to do this, and so where we ended up was that we tried to make it much clearer that it's whatever the agreement is, and going back to that between the instructor and the accrediting agency, what works there. So that is something that we tried to make it much clearer that it is the accrediting agency and what works for them, so that you don't have some auditor who doesn't know anything about instruction who's coming in and trying to make that determination. So with that, so that's the one. So explicit reliance on accreditor approval is the change that we see there. For substantive, that, remember that before it was about content, and it was about that you were talking about whatever the content is of the course. And here's this one and the regular are two of the trickier ones that we have here, and that they changed it from content to an activity-based thing, and that this was actually done outside of the subcommittee I was in, which that's another story. But it includes at least two of the following. Okay, underline, underline, underline. At least two of the following. So you don't have to do all of the following that I have on the next slide. And so that the course, and this is at the course level, that the course would, you'd be providing direct instruction, and then unfortunately direct instruction was not defined, but there's some thought that they're talking about synchronous instruction with that. The others are assessing or providing feedback on work. So assessment, quizzes, tests, whatever. Providing information or responding to questions, facilitating group discussions, or other things as defined by the accrediting agency. Okay, so where people, when I give this presentation, get wrapped around the axles on that first one, on the direct instruction. And does it mean that I am forced to have synchronous instruction? And no, you're not. Because remember, if I go back to the last one, it's at least two of these. And so really, it's really hard to imagine. There's probably are a few courses out there, but most courses have assessment. You're doing tests, you're asking for projects, you're doing something where you're giving a grade for it. So you're assessing the work. You're responding to questions, and really, if you're not doing 2, 3, and 4, it's probably a very poor distance ed course anyway, and you probably shouldn't get aid for it. So remember that this could be synchronous or asynchronous. Again, directed wasn't fully defined, but you can still do those other ones and still get still be good with that. Anything else you want to say? Okay, and we have that. So there we have for substantive that it went from a content nature to an activity-based sort of measure that we have there. And let's move to the next one, regular. Institution is regular, and even in parts of this that they had regular means regular, and then we objected to that. The final rule actually said that regular means regular, but we were able to get that changed. So institution ensures regular interaction, and the idea behind this is that that you're staying engaged with the student in some way. And we tried several things around regular, and one of the things that I was tasked with doing was representing the competency-based education community. And it's really hard, it's really hard to try for something like competency-based education, which by definition is irregular, is based upon the students, and how they move through the course, to try to fit them into regular. But and so this was a really tough assignment, and we couldn't change the word regular because we could only change the interpretation of the words, but we couldn't, because this word was in statute set by Congress, we couldn't actually change the word. So we did our best and came up with two parts here that will go on the next slide that you have here, and that you will get copies of all these slides as well, but these have been given to Wendy and Julie already, so you can get these if you want. So with this, that the number one there, Romanet I, as they say, that it's on some sort of predictable and scheduled basis. And this was intended to the type of regular course that most of us have, where we're going through a 15-week semester or a 10-week quarter, like that, and that you have a syllabus where you say, every Monday I will be releasing a video lecture, and on the 3rd, 6th, and 9th weeks that we're going to have a quiz, and you have a project that's due in the 10th and 12th weeks, and so that the person that they know, these activities are going to happen and when they're going to happen, and that you can point to that later on, that here's when we did things and that we did them. And we didn't want to get into the thing about people said, well, why don't you just say once a week? Well, or twice a week, 3 times. Well, and the problem with that was if you say once a week, that for a 5-week course, that's not enough. So you have 5-week courses. It might be enough for 16 weeks. And so tried to leave it. Remember, we had to do things for all the different variations of courses that are out there. So we had to leave it kind of broad. And then again, relying on the relationship with the accrediting agency about what works in this regular as well. Part two there, monitoring the student's academic engagement, that this idea was that you at least are following along, and it was much more around the CBE adaptive learning idea, that what you're doing is that you kind of know where the student is at and how far they are and where they're going, and that you're, if they're falling behind or having problems, that the instructor engages the student, or that the student, and this is the first time we actually see where the student doing something upon request at the bottom there actually counts for something. So you have those two parts of it. So we actually have the first nod towards CB, competency-based or adaptive learning, or different types of models than the regular, let's make it look exactly like the face-to-face one, except it's at a distance type of model, which is reflected more in the first one. When it came out of subcommittee, there, that and that you see between the two was actually an or, because we thought, well, typically you fit into either the standard 16-week model, or you're sort of competency-based or doing something that is not on a regular, what we would think of as a regular basis. And then it got changed to an and, unfortunately, and that, so you still have to do a bit of both. I've talked to some of my friends in the competency-based area, and that, so they're figuring out, okay, they're going to try to put some things into their instructions so that there's some regular points of interaction with them to try to meet number one, even though that they're mostly number two on this. And so with all this, that we're farther along than we were in terms of giving you guidance, but it's not going to be, again, back to, it's not going to tell you exactly what to do in every case on this. And we'll get to that in a moment. So again, some of the things that we have here about the regular, both predictable and scheduled, and tracking. And then I didn't particularly get into the interaction, but we saw, especially in that last one, that it's still mostly instructor initiated, but there are a few cases where they're taking something that's done by the student. With that, again, I've seen very little about the, again, this will be the rule beginning July 1st. I've seen very little guidance from the accrediting agencies, and it wouldn't hurt if you start asking accrediting agencies, how are you going to, what you are expecting of us, and have them challenge them to start helping you with some of this, because we're back to that accreditor institution relationship, and also looking at, how many of your courses, are distance education, and is there, I know there's some institutions that do things that kind of violate all of this, where there's very little interaction in the distance ed courses, and there's some poor distance ed courses, and are you in danger of them being declared correspondence courses? So look at what you're doing, and then look at your professional development in terms of, how do you work your professional development around this? It would be a lot better if you had the accrediting expectations, but I don't have those for you, unfortunately, because they're not out there. With that, Tony, let me see if there's any questions about this that people have.
Russ, so far I see no questions in the chat, but that doesn't mean that there aren't any. If you have questions about regular and substantive interaction, please send a question in the chat. Otherwise, we'll move on to your next topic.
Which means I'm exceedingly good, or all the emails being answered this morning. So which I understand. I understand that as well. So with that, I'm going to move forward with a few things about. So what do we do that there's no clear demarcation about what I should do or shouldn't do? I have to kind of interpret and figure out what works in my setting. And so really you want to create and document processes. And so that you want to say, you want to fast forward to, I'm sitting across from the accrediting review team, or I'm sitting across from the federal financial aid reviewers or auditors, and they're saying, well, here's the rules. What did you do in order to try to meet these rules? And you have to show that you have knowledge of the rules, and sort of document that not only do we have knowledge, but we set these processes or policies in place in order to meet these, and then be able to document that you've done that. And then actually on some of the things, like especially with, I can see, I haven't heard for sure, but on the student identity verification, my guess is that we're going to start moving to seeing some evidence. Okay, you say you're doing ABC. Does it work? Have you shown that you've curtailed cheating in some way, or you do feel that it's working, or it's not working, that you've adjusted? So really, thinking about that in terms of when, again, fast forward ahead to if you had to explain this to somebody, how would you explain it and show that you did your best to try to be in compliance? That's really all you can do. This becomes a defense thing more than an affirmative affirmation that yes, you've met guidelines, which are variable because of the different institutions and that. And that's all I have for that, Tony. I think I see that there's a few more questions. What do we have there?
Yeah, we've got actually a couple of questions about regular and substantive.
Okay.
If we can jump back to that topic a
Sure.
little, both within the online community and among the authorities, and authorities is in quotes, do you foresee expectations about regular and substantive evolving in the near future?
Evolving. Oh, yeah, I wonder if they could say a little bit more. So this is a pretty big. So let's go back. The original term regular and substantive interaction came in 1992 in the definition of distance education. This year, 2021, is the first time that there's been a real huge change to that regulation. Now think about that. That's 29 years between those two processes. I think we're living with what we have probably for a while. So there's that part of it that there could be, the current administration could decide to go back and try to adjust some of these things. I think that there'll be, it's probably not top of their list, that they might do it later somewhere down the road. So I think that what we're seeing here is probably what we're going to live with for a while. Mm-hmm. What we could see, I was going to get to this later on, is we could see, trying to apply this beyond just distance education courses to, adaptive learning courses that are face-to-face or other technology-based courses. So we might see that sort of evolution. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Great. Yep. Thank you. And the other question, as far as next steps that were provided for regular and substantive interaction, one of the next steps was looking at the accrediting agencies and their expectations. And the question is, will the accrediting agencies be expected to implement these changes immediately? Is there a timeline for when they are expected to provide some guidance?
Well, they're expected to start enforcing them beginning July 1st. I'm hoping that there's nothing that says, and thus they need to have guidance for you by July 1st. There's no explicit rule that says that they have to do that. However, we must remember that accrediting agencies are membership organizations, and I think we sometimes forget that. And I think it would behoove us, for all of us in the distance ed communities, to remind them of that and say, look, we have these rules going in. We have several questions about exactly how you're going to interpret this, and start getting to them about, we would like to get some specific questions and try to get them guidance. But there's nothing in the rules that forces them to give additional guidance. It's just my professional opinion that on some of these things, it would really help to get more guidance, and it would be helpful if you asked for that guidance.
If we asked, yeah, that's correct. If we ask for it. Those are the two questions in the chat. I'm just kind of wondering, the Biden-Harris administration are creating policies or will be creating policies around this area or introducing legislation. Will the Biden-Harris policies be the same, or will they be different from the Obama policies and practices? Is that an appropriate question to ask now, or should we save that for later on after you've introduced a few more?
Let me get to that in just a moment.
Okay. All right.
I will get that, but it's a really good thing, because there's some of these rules where, hey, there they are. That some of you may have heard there's an election, and that there is an inauguration. And that link down there is from my friend Van Davis, wrote a kind of a review of some of the things that have already happened. And to your question, you set me up very well on that. Thank you, Tony.
That's the role of the moderator.
That's the role of the moderator. Yeah, that I have. But there's some that I'm looking official papers. But I'm looking through that blog that on January 20th. Okay, that's Inauguration Day. That there are several executive orders that went through. Like the first one I'm reading about was about racial inequity support. One is about DACA, that this is just right on combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation, extending the moratorium on student loan repayment. That several of these things is that things that were undone by the Trump administration, that the first day that they were going back and putting some of those in. So I think several sorts of things. There are quite a number of things that we're going to see that either are already back or will be coming back. And the new people always ask about the Secretary of Education. I'll give you a hint that the Secretary of Education is always somebody from K through 12. And that's mostly what they mostly care about, K through 12, and then running the whole Department of Education. And then what the people we need to watch for is this Undersecretary for Post-Secondary Education, just announced a few days ago, James Kval. He was in the Clinton administration. He was in the Obama administration. He's back now as the top post-secondary education person. Was at a very consumer protection focused organization in California called TICAS, that you see there. The T is part of TICAS, the Institute for College and Access and Success. Very thoughtful, very consumer protection oriented sort of guy. Michelle Asher Cooper will be another very high up person. Higher Ed Policy Institute was very much about research and evidence-based practices. So we'll see a lot of that. And actually, under the Trump administration, that some of those out of the entire administration, that a couple of the people that were in charge of post-secondary ed were actually some of the most competent out of out of everything. That's a low bar, but actually very good. But we're very glad for these people, and think that we'll get quite a bit out of them and what they're doing. And so, looking at some of these things that going back to again, the consumer protection and equity focus will be huge. I mentioned some of the things that were changed on the first days around the LGBTQ community, and looking at them. Gainful employment is a rule that will likely be coming back. Equity issues. There's going to be a lot of interest in for-profit education and what they do, in greater oversight. There was really no oversight, or very little oversight under the previous administration, and certainly that is something that James Kval, in his role at TICAS, was something that they're very concerned about. So we'll see a lot of things there. We've heard a lot about free college, under student affordability, and about student debt and those sorts of issues, working on that. Joe Biden, community college professor, neighboring state to you. So that there's a lot of things on community colleges, and already a major announcement about reliance on apprenticeships, and doing that, and which has sort of been true through Obama, through Trump, through this administration. I'd expect more compliance, that the Obama administration was very compliance heavy, very compliance focused. And they were very good about putting out what are called Dear Colleague letters, which are guidance. Very nice, I love that, dear colleague. But it's something where it said that we, like direct instruction in there, that they might come out and say something, here's what we mean by direct instruction, and give you more guidance about this fits and this doesn't. That the Trump administration just really did not like putting those out. And so, but if you're held to a standard, it's nice to know what it is that you have out there. And actually they'll hire staff too. That I think the Ed Technology Group, I think went from 14 down to 2 staff within the Department of Education by the end of the Trump administration. And so they'll refill some of these positions to do these things. The final thing there that I think we'll need to look at, excuse me a second, is that there is some skepticism about distance ed and digital learning. There's some conflation by, not necessarily by these folks, but some in the consumer protection industry, that distance ed means for-profit ed, regardless of who does it. So we have to watch for that. There's already been action from some senators, and I think we definitely will see this out of this administration about more rules about OPMs, so online program management companies, and the contracts and what they say to students and what they do with students, and what is the institution giving up in that. I think we'll see more focus on accessibility on there. I think we could see some tweaking on regular and substantive interaction and some things on there. And then also, have you raised your hand? How many are SARA members? That there could be some tweaks to how reciprocity works, that we could see some things that happen there, and that taken to the extreme, that some of the consumer protection people want, it could actually end SARA. And I don't mean to over alarm you on that. I don't think that's going to happen, but there are those who would like to see that happen. So we certainly will argue against that if that were to happen. But those are some of the things. And so, Tony, I was wondering if you had other thoughts about what came out of the Obama administration that might get continued, or what might be different.
Not really. I know that the Biden-Harris administration, they come into office really seeking to simultaneously address the health and economic consequences of the pandemic.
Right.
And they're talking really clearly about helping Americans get skills. They need to get back to work. And they're looking at career pathways, workforce development policy to drive, that would be driven by federal support for colleges and universities, and wanted to know, maybe if you could talk about any insights you might have about what that support might look like for career pathways, workforce development in that realm of change and under the pandemic.
Okay. Yeah, and that's really helpful to say that this whole pandemic thing is going to keep them going for quite a while, and that I probably should explain some things about process. Well, first, so these people aren't in yet. They're nominated. They have to get approved. They have to get approved by the Senate. Shouldn't be a problem. There's usually, unless they've done weird things, and these people have not, that they will get approved. So you still have to get them in. Remember, I said that the Department of Ed is way understaffed, and so they have to do a lot of staffing to actually do some of the things that they want to do, because you can't just issue regulations, and part of that is that we're going to live with the regulations that are coming out, and that they are, because of this negotiated rulemaking process that I talked about. There's several steps to it, that they have to announce the issues that they're going to look at. So let's say that they wanted to review state authorization or regular and substantive interaction. They have to put out a notice that they're going to do that. They have to set up a process to do that. They have to create negotiated rulemaking team, and then they get nominees to be on that team. So they say, okay, we're going to talk about regular and substantive interaction, and we want people who represent these people who are affected by that. And so they'll get nominees, they'll take that committee, then that committee then meets, and it takes a while, and that they work with the department to come up with, here's a proposed set of new rules. And then those then go out for comment, and then they take the comments and then issue the new rules. So you can see that even if they were to start today and these people were approved, it's going to take a while for any change to things that are actually the rules that are in place. And so I think they're going to happen. And there's a few things that they can do by executive order, but they really can't change things that are actually in place in rules that went through that process without also going through that process.
Mm-hmm. Are there any questions from our participants? Otherwise, I can ask another question. There's nothing that's in the chat, but I'm sure that you have burning questions now that we have Russ here. Just a question, and once again, we're asking you to, the new administration is a little more than a month old, and I'm asking you to kind of look at your crystal ball. But the reason I ask about the similarities or differences between the Obama administration and the Biden administration is that we at least have a look as Joe Biden was Barack Obama's vice president. We assume that there will be a continuation of some of those policies. Just in general, where is digital learning? Where was it in the Obama administration, and what could we possibly expect about support for digital learning in the new administration? As I said before, that one of the things that we've learned as a result of the pandemic is the obvious lack of access to technology and Wi-Fi and devices for students, especially underrepresented students of color. Is this now that we have gone through, or we are continuing to go through, a pandemic where we're utilizing more technology for instruction, any insights or highlights or predictions that could be made about the support for technology and access in this new realm?
Yeah, and under the Obama administration, there was an interesting dichotomy within the Department of Education, where there were those who, including the then undersecretary, who's now the head of ECE, that he was very much about innovation, and that they were really pushing competency-based education and trying to get that moving forward. They were pushing on adaptive learning, that they were pushing on distance education, really pushing it, and then have that. And then you had other parts that were on the compliance, and then there's something called the Office of Inspector General, which kind of reviews what they do, that was extremely leery of anything that had to do that was not face-to-face instruction, and really felt that that it didn't work. The evidence was all bad, and if you go back to a year ago, that there was, 2 years ago, that there was all sorts of things that some of the consumer protection folks that were of that ilk, cherry picked some of the research to show that all Black, Latinx, and Indigenous people do poorly on this, and so we should not let them do distance ed. That type of thinking. Some of that will be in this department. I think you asked for prediction. We're going to be challenged on an evidence-based basis, about what works and what doesn't work. I think we're going to see some ideas that get floated that are pretty draconian for us. They come from a good place in terms of consumer protection, and I want to protect consumers too, but I want to not protect students completely out of not being able to have access to distance ed. That we could go that far in some of the things, or change reciprocity so much that we have no reciprocity, and therefore the cost for institutions going across state lines is so much that only the for-profits can afford it, right? Or SNHU or Arizona State or all this. So there's unintended consequences of some of these things, and so I don't mean to, but I'm hoping that James and some of the others who are more moderate can keep that balance like happened under the Obama administration, so that there are tougher rules, but there are tougher rules that make sense. That you have in there. And so I'm going to just finish up a couple other things since we don't have any other questions. That some of these things are covered in this book that we did late last year, and that since there was the election and everything, there hasn't been much in the way of changes. So most of it is still pretty current. And you can see some of the different issues that we have there. And that if you want to get this policy playbook, that it's free and that you can get it at that link. And again, you're going to get the slides for all of this. And so it explains a lot of these things in a lot of other areas, that when you went from face-to-face to digital learning, it's not that there are different rules, but the rules are different when you go to them, go from one to the other. And so other things are State Authorization Network. Our Frontiers blog is free. You can subscribe to that. Always love to have more WCT members, but wanted to get that. So with that, Tony, I'll see what wrap up you would like to have.
Sure. Are there any questions? We have about 3 minutes left before the actual webinar is over. So I want to give folks an opportunity to ask questions, to at least get one more opportunity to speak directly with Russ. You have satisfied our urge and have done a really nice job predicting what should happen in the next few years, months, term.
Well, thank you, Tony, and thank you. Always love working with Julie and Wendy and the whole gang in Maryland. So thank you all, and you see where you can reach me if something comes up later.
Great. I want to thank you, Russ, for sharing your thoughts, your ideas, and your predictions for what is to be expected. This really was a lot of fun. I'm happy that the MOL team invited me to participate in this conversation. I also want to thank Maryland Online for making the spring webinar series available to all of us. I encourage everyone to look at the MOL website for a complete lineup of summer and fall webinars as well. I want to thank everyone for your questions and participating in the morning's event. We will make the slide deck available of Russ's presentation, as well as a recording of this webinar will be hosted by Maryland Online on their website. We have a lot to look forward to, but in the interim, enjoy the rest of your day and the beautiful weather that we are expecting, at least for the next 24 to 48 hours. So thank you all very much. Have a great day. Thank you very much, Russ, and we'll see you all later. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.